Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, predicting this Florida Gators depth chart heading into 2024. Now, we've talked about this roster from a lot of different angles, but we haven't gone up and kind of made our predictions on who's going to win some of these starting spots heading into 2024. Going to do that today. Very excited to get into it, but I want to start with what I think is most exciting about this Florida Gators team heading into 2024 as opposed to 12 months ago. And I think that's the depth, right? At times last year, whether it was injuries, whether it was just poor roster construction, Florida did not have a lot of depth at certain positions, and they were kind of just forced to play guys because the competition and depth during spring practice and fall camp wasn't there, right? Damian George starting at tackle, probably the best example of that. Why to be excited about this Florida Gators roster heading into 2024? Yes, I do think this roster got more talented, but I think more importantly, the competition and depth is in a much better spot. And you talk about winning games in the month of November. You talk about having the strongest team you can have in the beginning of September. It starts with competition. It starts with depth in spring practice and fall camp. And I think Florida is in a much better spot this year from a depth standpoint. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. It truly has been a blast talking this program, whether we're doing transfer portal updates, film deep dives, recruiting updates. You guys continue to show a ton of support to the boys. Cannot thank y'all enough. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one now. We'll start with the quarterback position. And there will be some fans that say this is a quarterback battle. And I think this is exactly how you want your quarterback room to look, where Graham Mertz, in my mind, was one of the biggest surprises in that 2023 college football season. He was excellent. And this is a guy that you saw him get better, more comfortable in that Florida Gators offense as the weeks went on. I think Graham Mertz has a chance to be one of the better starting quarterbacks in the SEC last year. You're talking about a quarterback that threw for almost 3,000 yards, a 73% completion percentage, 20 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. You have your quarterback that you know you can win a lot of football games with, and then you have arguably the most talented quarterback in the country in true freshman DJ Lagway. I say that as a true freshman. There's just not many quarterbacks across college football that have not only the arm talent that DJ Lagway has, but the body, the physical traits. DJ Lagway is an absolute box checker, and what a better situation than to have DJ Lagway come in and learn behind Graham Mertz, who's played a lot of football. I'm a massive fan of how this quarterback room is going to shake out now, where I'm going to throw kind of my own flavor on this Florida Gators depth chart is predicting the starting wide receivers. And I'm going to go with 3 guys, right? Tremere Dike, you bring in from Wisconsin. I think he is going to be that true. We're going to stretch it vertically. You have that chemistry with Graham Mertz. And one of the things that we've kind of been banging the table for is let Graham Mertz push the ball down the field more. I think they kind of had a leash on Graham Mertz. I don't know if they fully trusted him in that Florida Gators offense. And some of you guys made really good points as well in terms of, well, the offensive line wasn't really protected all that well. So they didn't really have the time to have those routes fully developed 20 plus yards down the field. I think you're going to see Graham Mertz try to push the ball down the field a little bit more. And a guy like Tremere Dike, who averages 16 yards per catch during his career at Wisconsin, already has that chemistry with Graham Mertz, is going to be that veteran wide receiver that is probably working downfield. Now, the next wide receiver we got to talk about, probably should have led with this one, but Eugene Wilson. I think Eugene Wilson is truly a special wide receiver, and I'm looking for them to put a little bit more responsibility on Eugene Wilson. It felt like last year at times, and again, I get it because he was a true freshman, at times they just kind of used him as a gadget guy where he was playing a lot and having a lot of touches, but a lot of it was manufactured, right? End arounds, screens, quick hitters, and that is Eugene Wilson's wheelhouse. But this is a guy with elite movement skills. I want to see him be a polished wide receiver that's running routes downfield, creating separation, and then creating after the catch. Now, don't get me wrong, end around screens, any way you can get the football into Eugene Wilson's hands, that's my vote. but I think he can do a little bit more than you saw during his true freshman year. And I think that's what excites me about the year two development of Eugene Wilson. Now, that last wide receiver spot, I'm going to go to the young talent, and I'm going to go to Andy Jean, a guy that was, I think, a lot of Florida Gator fans thought Andy Jean would be the true freshman breakout last year. Then I ended up being Eugene Wilson. I think that you have a lot of young talent, right? Whether it's Andy Jean, whether it's Aiden Mazel, whether it's Hawkins, who's coming in as a true freshman, that's arguably going to be the fastest player in college football next year. There's a lot of young talent that I think offers this Florida Gators wide receiver room the highest ceiling, and that's who I'm going to go with. And I think Andy Jean's a guy that really polished route runner, can create separation. So if you're asking me the starting three wide receivers, and no doubt guys like Aiden Mizell are going to work in as well, I'm going to go Tremere Dike, Eugene Wilson, and Andy Jean. Now, at the running back spot, not many questions asked there. I think Montrell Johnson Jr. is going to be the running back one. And now the question is, all right, who is going to be that running back two? Is it going to be Webb? Is it going to be Cam Carroll? Is it going to be Conan Daniels coming in as a true freshman? But at the end of the day, we're projecting our starting roster, our starting depth chart. Montrell Johnson going to be running back one for this Florida Gators offense. And kind of the bugaboo, I think the biggest question mark in terms of what this Florida Gators team looks like heading into 2024 is going to be the offensive line. And this is where I really want to hammer home that idea that the depth on this offensive line is in a much better spot than it was last year, specifically at that offensive tackle position. That is arguably the worst position to not have depth in a season. And Florida just didn't have depth at that offensive tackle spot. And you could tell because they just forced Damian George out there at tackle when, I mean, it was pretty obvious to most Florida Gator fans watching that he is not a tackle. And so now you look at this tackle room, you add two guys that I think are really exciting, right? Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, I think, is probably just a lock to start at right tackle, was phenomenal at San Diego State, played some really good football. You feel good about him jumping up to the SEC level. You have a bona fide starting tackle at right tackle. Then you go to left tackle, and I think you got a really interesting competition between Austin Barber, who definitely went through some growing pains at that left tackle spot last year. But then you have a guy in Devin Manuel, who's coming from Arkansas, really long arms, really good frame, probably still a raw kind of guy. I am going to lean Austin Barber. And I know I like Devin Manuel. I think he has probably a higher upside than Austin Barber, but I think Austin Barber going into year two at that left tackle spot gives you a really nice floor. And you look at this tackle position this year, I mean, you feel pretty good about Crenshaw-Dixon and Austin Barber, and a guy like Devin Manuel, who, if Austin Barber and Devin Manuel are having that position battle, you feel pretty good about one of those two winning it out and being a solid tackle last year. Again, going back to this year, going back to 12 months ago, they didn't really have competition at the tackle spots. We had Austin Barber, Damian George, and we are going to stick them out there because we don't have any other tackles to play. You can even throw Cam Waits in there, who I don't think would start, but again, is another quality piece to add to that competition. You feel a little bit better about how the tackle room shakes out last year. And the more film I go back to and watch, the biggest problem were the tackles. Like the inside of this Florida Gators offensive line, I think might even get better this year, but that was really not the problem. The problem was Damian George at that tackle spot. Now, Damian George at guard, I think most Florida Gator fans are really excited to see how that one shakes out. I'm going to pick him to start at that right guard spot. Jake Slaughter at the center spot, who was really damn good for the Florida Gators, probably their best offensive lineman and most consistent offensive lineman as a young player last year. And then Najee Harris. I think you guys all know that I am fired up about Najee Harris. Was a huge fan of him coming out of high school. You go back and watch the film when he was playing Charlotte. This is a guy that, kind of reminds you of Osiris Torrance, where just the size, it kind of overwhelms defenders. I think he's a phenomenal athlete for that size. A real road grader in the run game, but I think takes some strides in pass protection. I am high on this Florida Gators offensive line. And again, what was the biggest problem of this Florida Gators offense? It's easy to point to play calling, and I would like to see that take a step in the right direction. But when you have an offensive line that at times was as much of a liability as Florida had last year, it's hard to make any offense look good. And so this offensive line taking a step, I am really excited about. Arliss Boardingham starting at tight end, no questions about that. Now, moving over to the defense, you start with this defensive line in a very similar conversation that we had for the offensive line. And that is the depth on this defensive line is much better than it was last year. Now, I want to start on the inside of that defensive line where you return Cam Jackson and Caleb Banks, both guys that played really solid football last year. But I think, again, the big bugaboo for Florida was outside of those two guys who are big bodies, like there wasn't much depth, right? You had a guy like Desmond Watson. You had a guy like Lyons. It wasn't the greatest depth behind Caleb Banks and Cam Jackson. And to highlight why I think this depth is so good, I don't even know if both of those guys start in 2024 because you add Joey Slackman in the transfer portal from Penn, who I think is arguably might be the best interior defensive lineman for the Florida Gators in 2024. And then you add a true freshman in LJ McCray. And so now you start looking at this inside of that defensive line. And even if LJ McCray is not starting for this Florida Gators team, he's providing quality depth. We know what he can do year one on a college football field. Cam Jackson, Caleb Banks, Joey Slackman, LJ McCray, that's a very solid interior defensive line rotation. And you throw in guys like Desmond Watson or Jamari Lyons, you start feeling pretty good about the inside of that defensive line. Then you go to kind of the outside. I think the question is that big defensive end spot. I'm going to go Kelby Collins. The more film I watch on Florida from 2023, the more I'm kind of convinced that you're going to see Kelby Collins take that step in 2024 and be that guy. And then you have Tyreek Sapp and Justin Boone coming back from injury that rounds out a really good and deep defensive end position. Now, that jack spot that was held down by Princely U last year, that's my big question mark, right? You have two young guys in Cam James and TJ Searcy, who I think flashed, but we didn't see a ton of them. You're bringing George Gums through the transfer portal. This is a position where I could see Florida maybe going to the transfer portal and adding an elite pass rusher to kind of replace Princely U, because as of right now, the way I see it, I don't know if I see an elite pass rusher at that jack linebacker spot to replace what Princely U did last year. And now maybe TJ Searcy, Cam James, if Florida doesn't go to the transfer portal to add one, you probably feel pretty good about TJ Searcy, Cam James maybe taking that step going into year two. But I wouldn't be surprised that if after spring practice, a couple really good edge rushers pop up in the portal, the Florida Gators look to add at that position, or George Gums, a guy that was formerly a wide receiver making that transition to that pass rushing spot. He could be a guy that turns up to be really good for Florida as well. But you look at this line, you got a lot of names that we just talked about that are going to be playing, that are going to be rotating. And again, last year, you were kind of forced to play some true freshmen when you probably didn't want to play them as much as you did. So the depth looking much better on the defensive line. And again, offensive line, defensive line, that's when you need that depth. Now, that linebacker spot, I am extremely high on what this linebacker room can be in 2024. Not only do you bring in Ron Roberts, who I think is one of the better pure linebacker coaches in all of college football, but you have two really talented guys in Pup Howard and Shamar James. This has tremendous upside in terms of what this linebacker room can do. And then you sprinkle in a guy like Derek Wing, who I thought played pretty solid football towards the end of the year. You inject Aiden Childs, who gets in the summer, Miles Graham, who's already on campus. This is a linebacker spot that, yes, it is a little bit young, but man, is it exciting in terms of the talent that you have. But if you're asking me to project my two starters, Pup Howard, Shamar James, that could be a very, very good linebacker duo. Now, the most interesting conversation for this defense is, how does this secondary shake out? You got a lot of puzzle pieces, a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things. The way I see it shaking out is your boundary cornerbacks. I don't have many questions, right? Jason Marshall Jr., Devin Moore. I think you're really excited to see if Jason Marshall Jr. can have kind of a bounce back year from that 2023 year, where I don't think he was as bad as many Florida Gator fans think, but certainly wasn't as good as we expected him to be. I thought Devin Moore played some damn good football on the other side. You look at that safety spot, and what an interesting combination of two young studs in Jordan Castell and Bryce Thornton. And then you inject guys like Asa Turner and Triquez Bridges, I'm going to go with the Young Bucks, right? Jordan Castell, we just did a film breakdown on him. He played very good football for a true freshman. Bryce Thornton came on, and then I'm going to put DJ Douglas at that star position. Now, Triquez Bridges is kind of an interesting puzzle piece that I think could play. I think you can play every single position in that Florida Gators back end. And that's going to be really interesting to see where he shakes out. But I think DJ Douglas's ability to be really good around the line of scrimmage in the run game probably fits best at that star spot. And then you have a veteran in Asa Turner that has just played a ton of football. And as of right now, I'm probably picking Jordan Castell and Bryce Thornton to play over him. But Asa Turner, you wouldn't be upset if you trot out Asa Turner week one and he's a starting safety. And so you look at this roster, and I think two things that really excite you. One, the young talent that you expect to take that step, but more importantly, the competition at all these different spots. That is going to allow you to get the best players on the field week one of this 2024 year. Really excited to continue to monitor it, see how it plays out. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section, and we'll talk to y'all later.